Declared Kia and forgotten by the system meant more than a clerical line on a report. It meant a life reduced to paperwork, a story sealed by signatures, and a future erased by a single coded phrase. In her world, that phrase was supposed to bring closure to families and clarity to command. Instead, it flattened everything she had been into one official assumption. She was gone. The system did not ask how certain they were. It did not question the gaps in the account. It did what systems do. It processed, stamped, archived, and moved on. Her name traveled through channels she could no longer correct. A casualty list, a brief to higher command, a folded flag that reached her parents' door with a knock that froze the air in their house. Officers delivered words written for moments like that, spoken with practiced sympathy, spoken as if her fate was known instead of guessed. What they did not see was how quickly the rest of her world emptied out. Friends held services. Teammates whispered what they remembered about her. People who had trained with her only months earlier talked about her bravery in the past tense, because the system had told them that was the only tense that fit. In headquarters, her file slipped to the back of a drawer where no one expected anything new to be added. A photo of her in uniform was pinned on a remembrance board beside others who had never come home. The system did not feel the weight of that choice. It did not feel anything at all. Once the box was checked, it labeled every unanswered question as irrelevant. What no one realized was how fast the world moves on when the paperwork says you are dead. Pay records stop. Access codes vanish. Benefits shift. Protocols tighten around a name that no longer exists in active status. The system becomes a maze designed for the living, and she was written out of that category without a second thought. Even her digital footprint froze in place. Her logs, missions, and evaluations became a closed loop no one bothered revisiting. The people who cared about her were left with ceremonies, scripted lines, and a few old photos to stand in for the truth. She had spent her entire career learning to navigate complexity, yet nothing prepared her for the quiet erasure that followed the report. When command lists someone as Kia, the world builds a story around that decision. It shapes the way they are remembered. It gives people a clean ending, even if the reality is anything but clean. Her story, once full of motion and momentum, turned into a tale frozen in time, told in the same flat language repeated in military halls across the world. Her absence became accepted fact. Training units honored her name during roll calls. New recruits heard fragments of her achievements, but never knew her as a person. Officers referenced her last mission as an example of sacrifice, unaware that she was still somewhere out there, alive, breathing, fighting. The system she had served with loyalty had no space for uncertainty. It preferred tidy answers, and nothing was tidier than assuming the worst and stamping it with finality. The strangest part was how quickly people adapted. The world did not pause for doubt. Colleagues transferred, units rotated, missions continued, and her memory faded into a respectful silence that masked how incomplete the truth really was. Her parents placed her medals in a case by the living room window. Her brother stopped expecting her calls. Her team left her locker untouched for a while, then eventually cleared it out, unsure if doing so was kindness or betrayal. Meanwhile, the machinery that declared her dead kept turning, blind to the fact that it had erased someone who hadn't fallen at all. Forgotten by the system did not mean forgotten by people, but the system had a gravity that pulled every assumption in one direction. It took photos, plaques, names etched in memorial stones, and turned them into proof of a loss that had never been confirmed. That proof became the story everyone believed, and in the silence that followed her own supposed death, she learned what it meant to disappear in full view of the institutions she had trusted. Surviving 3 lost years off the record began the moment she realized no one was coming. The world believed she was gone, and that belief shaped everything that followed. There was no extraction plan with her name on it. No radio chatter searching for her signal, no chain of command tracking her movement. She was on her own in a place that did not care whether she lived through the night. 3 years is a long time to be missing, and even longer when the missing part is not an accident but a consequence of being written out of existence. Her surroundings were unforgiving. Terrain that looked empty at a distance was full of threats up close. Every ridge hid someone willing to survive at her expense. Every village eyed outsiders with suspicion. She learned quickly that staying alive required constant motion. She slept in short bursts, ate whatever she could find or barter for, and kept her presence small enough to pass unnoticed. Human contact became a luxury she rarely allowed herself, because trust was a resource she could not afford to spend. Her training taught her how to use limited tools, but nothing in her manuals explained how to navigate a life where she could not call for rescue, because the people she would call believed she was dead. Her identity was now a liability. If she revealed it, she risked being exploited, traded, or eliminated. If she hid it, she risked forgetting who she had been. She walked a thin line between survival and erasure, carrying memories that kept her steady and wounds that reminded her she was still human. Information was her compass. She picked up rumors the way others collected supplies. Stories from travelers, whispers in marketplaces, stray comments from armed groups passing through. She pieced together an understanding of the shifting alliances and dangers around her. She learned which routes were patrolled, which villages were under the influence of hostile militias, which areas would kill her quickly, and which ones might only try. Each decision shaped another day of survival. Weather became a force she negotiated with. Heat pushed the limits of her endurance. Nights turned cold enough to cut through her clothes and steal sleep from her bones. Storms forced her to seek shelter in abandoned structures or carve out space under rock formations just stable enough to hold. Her injuries healed slowly and unevenly. Some days she walked with a limp that made her a softer target. Other days she felt strong enough to outrun danger, but not strong enough to outrun the fear that she would eventually break. She missed voices more than safety. The sound of teammates breathing beside her. The rhythm of commands spoken with clarity and purpose. Even the sarcasm that floated around the barracks. Silence became an enemy she fought daily, because silence tried to convince her she had been forgotten. She kept her mind sharp by running through old drills in her head, reciting mission protocols, reviewing every skill she had ever learned. She forced herself to stay disciplined even when there was no one left to enforce discipline. Food scarcity shaped her days. She learned to identify edible roots, berries, and insects. She bargained with small items she scavenged from abandoned sites. She patched her clothing with scraps she found along the way. When she fell ill, she treated herself with improvised remedies and sheer stubbornness. Every setback reminded her she was operating without backup, without medical support, without even the faint hope that someone might come looking. Months passed in a rhythm that felt both slow and unpredictable. She measured time by the changing position of the sun, by the growth of plants along familiar paths, by the shift in patrol patterns she observed from a distance. She watched conflicts flare and fade. She saw groups rise and collapse. She remained hidden inside the noise of a region caught between too many agendas. Her presence was a shadow, and she learned how to move like one. What kept her alive was not luck. It was a refusal to accept the finality of the report written about her. She repeated her name in her mind on days when exhaustion blurred everything. She reminded herself she had family who once waited for her, a team who had fought beside her, a life that had not truly ended even if the world insisted it had. Survival became an act of defiance. It became a promise she made to herself each morning when she forced her eyes open. 3 years off the record did not make her invisible. They made her sharper, tougher, and more aware of every fragile thread that held a person together. She carried each day like a weight, because each day was proof that she was still out there, still fighting, still pushing against the silence that tried to swallow her whole. Returning home alive against all odds began with a moment so small she almost missed it. A break in the horizon. A path that felt less hostile than the ones before it. A sense, not of safety, but of possibility. She had walked through years of uncertainty with no guarantee that home even existed anymore in the form she remembered. When she finally crossed the invisible line between surviving and returning, it did not feel triumphant. It felt unreal, like stepping into a version of life she had watched from a distance for too long. The first challenge was reaching anyone who would believe her. She approached every sign of civilization carefully, aware that showing up after being declared killed in action could trigger suspicion, confusion, or danger. She looked like someone who had lived through too much. Her clothes carried the wear of years spent hiding. Her face showed the cost of hardship. Her voice felt foreign in her own throat after so long without conversation. Yet she forced herself forward, driven by something simple. She wanted her life back. She wanted proof that the world she lost still had space for her. When she made contact with a group of aid workers, she kept her story tight. Name, rank, and a stripped-down version of the truth. Enough to verify her existence, but not enough to overwhelm the people in front of her. The workers stared at her in disbelief. One checked her information against a battered device, and the expression that crossed his face told her exactly what the system had written about her. She watched him struggle with the contradiction standing right in front of him. She understood. She barely believed it herself. Authorities took over. They asked questions fast, as if trying to make her slip. They wanted specifics, timelines, explanations for how someone could survive after being listed dead for 3 years. She answered with clarity, but inside she held back pieces of her experience that were too raw to hand over to strangers. She sat in rooms lit by harsh lamps, surrounded by people who kept glancing at her file as if expecting the paperwork to rewrite itself. The world needed time to adjust to her existence again. Her return traveled through official channels in a rush. A message to command, a rapid review of her original report, a scramble to understand how the mistake had happened. She imagined officers staring at her name with a mix of shock and embarrassment. The system that had erased her now had to account for her, and that alone reshaped the dynamic. She was no longer a statistic. She was a living contradiction. The flight home was quiet. She sat by the window, watching the landscape shift beneath her, feeling the weight of re-entry settle into her bones. She wondered what waited on the other side. The plane hummed with normalcy that felt surreal after years of improvising survival. She wore clean clothes for the first time in a long while. Her hands shook slightly as she held a cup of water. Every small comfort reminded her of the time she spent without any. When she landed, the air on the tarmac felt heavy with expectation. Officials greeted her with caution and curiosity. Some looked at her with respect, others with discomfort, as if she represented a flaw in a system that preferred clean narratives. She answered more questions, signed more documents, and underwent evaluations that pushed her physically and mentally. They needed to confirm her condition. She needed to confirm she was truly back. Seeing her family again broke something loose inside her. Her mother stared at her as if afraid she would vanish. Her father held her in a grip that bordered on disbelief. Her brother's voice cracked when he said her name. She felt the pull of every moment they had mourned her. They had carried a grief she never meant to give them. Their relief was tangled with the memory of loss, and she understood that her return did not erase the pain they had lived through. She had come home, but home had changed in her absence. Her team reacted differently. Some ran to her with raw joy. Others froze, stunned by the impossible made real. A few struggled to meet her eyes, weighed down by their own guilt for moving on. She felt their hesitation. She also felt their loyalty. They shared memories from before she disappeared, filling the space between them with reminders of the life she had once lived. She listened, absorbing each word, trying to bridge the gap between the person she had been and the person the last 3 years had shaped. Returning did not fix everything. She carried trauma in layers she had not yet untangled. She woke at night thinking she was still hiding. She scanned every room without meaning to. She moved like someone expecting danger. But being home offered something she had not felt in years, the chance to rebuild. The chance to stand in the open without fear of being hunted. The chance to reclaim her identity piece by piece. Against all odds, she was back. Not as the woman the system had frozen in time, but as someone forged in the space between loss and survival. Someone ready to step into a world that had learned to live without her and reminded that she was never gone in the ways that mattered. Rebuilding identity after being mourned began the moment She realized people were looking at her like a memory that had somehow stood up and walked back into the room. They greeted her with relief, awe, confusion, and a hint of fear, because grief leaves marks on the living, and her return forced everyone to confront what those marks meant. She had come back, but not as the version they remembered. That earlier version had been frozen in their minds as brave, steady, unbreakable. The woman standing before them carried 3 years of silence, scars that did not show on her skin, and a different understanding of who she was. She had to navigate the strange space between being alive and being previously dead. Bureaucracy treated her like a system error. Documents had to be corrected one by one. Her medical file, her service record, her identification, even her pay status had to be rebuilt from scratch. Every form reminded her that the system had declared her gone. Every correction reminded her she was fighting for the right to exist again in the very institution she had once served without hesitation. People in offices whispered when she walked by, unsure whether to salute her or stare. She felt like she was watching her own life from the outside. Her family needed time. They had spent years grieving her. They learned to live without expecting her voice on the other end of a phone call. They rearranged their routines around the weight of her absence. Now she was home, but their grief did not disappear just because she came through the door. They still flinched when they heard her footsteps, still paused when she entered a room, still studied her face like they were waiting for her to fade again. She tried to reassure them with her presence, but she knew the healing had to happen slowly. She understood that her return reopened wounds they had just started to close. She had to relearn habits of normal life, waking up in a bed instead of on packed earth, eating without scanning the edges of the room, showering without keeping one ear tuned for danger. These simple tasks felt foreign, as if she had stepped into a life built by someone else. She often moved quietly without meaning to. She stayed alert for no reason other than the reflex of survival that had shaped every moment of her lost years. People told her she could relax now, but her mind did not trust comfort yet. Comfort had become a signal for vulnerability, something she had avoided for too long. Her team wanted her back, but even that required adjustment. They had mourned her. Some of them blamed themselves for not finding her. Others felt guilty for replacing her. A few had sealed their grief so tightly they did not know how to open it again. She could feel the mix of emotions each time she stepped into the training area. They asked her questions about her time away, but she gave them only what they needed to know. Not because she wanted to hide it, but because some experiences were too heavy to hand to anyone else. She sensed their discomfort when they saw glimpses of how the missing years had changed her. She sensed their admiration too, but admiration felt strange against the rawness she carried. She struggled with her own reflection. The mirror showed a woman who looked familiar, but not the same. Her posture had shifted. Her eyes held a depth she had not seen before. She studied her own face the way she studied terrain on missions, searching for signs of who she had been and who she was becoming. For a long time, she avoided photographs of herself from before the disappearance. They made her feel like she was looking at a stranger who lived a simpler life. A life that did not understand loss in the way she understood it now. Therapists and evaluators asked her to talk about her emotions. They wanted details. They wanted patterns. They wanted to quantify how much she had changed or how much she had endured. She answered enough to satisfy them. But inside, she knew some parts of her experience were not meant to be dissected. Some memories existed simply because they were carried, not because they needed to be spoken. Her identity had become layered, and peeling those layers apart felt like pulling threads from fabric that had barely held together. The hardest part was reclaiming her sense of purpose. Before she vanished, she had a clear path, a rhythm of training, missions, teamwork, and progress. Now she had to ask herself what she wanted her life to look like. She could not go back to the person she had been. She had seen too much. She had survived too much. She had been the subject of ceremonies and folded flags and whispered condolences. She could not pretend none of that had happened. Instead, she had to understand how to build a future that made sense for the person she was now. Every day, she worked on grounding herself in the present. She took long walks on familiar streets. She reconnected with people who cared about her. She allowed herself to feel moments of peace even when they felt undeserved. Slowly, she stitched together pieces of her identity with patience she never knew she had. She did not try to erase the years she lost. She tried to weave them into who she was becoming, shaping a self that acknowledged the pain without letting it define her. Rebuilding her identity was not about returning to who she used to be. It was about accepting that surviving changed her, and understanding that coming home meant starting again with the strength and resolve earned through 3 years of being forgotten, hidden, and unbroken in ways no one else would ever fully grasp. Earning trust to lead the Navy SEALs did not start with a ceremony or a promotion board. It started with the quiet reality that she had to prove herself all over again in a world that had already written her obituary. People respected her for surviving, but respect alone does not put someone in command of an elite unit. Trust does, and trust is built slowly, especially in a community where every decision can mean life or death. She knew the SEALs valued performance above story. They cared about actions, not headlines. So when she stepped back into the training grounds, she carried no expectation of special treatment. She pushed through drills with the same intensity she had before her disappearance, even though the years away had reshaped her body and sharpened her instincts in ways the standard assessments could not measure. The instructors watched her with a mix of wariness and curiosity. Some doubted she could return to her old form. Some doubted she should. But doubt did not slow her down. If anything, it fueled her. Her teammates tested her too. Not out of malice. Out of necessity. They needed to know she could still move with them, think with them, anticipate danger with the same precision she once had. They watched how she approached each challenge. They noted how she reacted under pressure. They tracked whether her time away had dulled her edge or carved it sharper. She matched them in physical drills, outmaneuvered them in tactical scenarios, and demonstrated an awareness built from surviving situations far harsher than any controlled exercise. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. Skepticism turned into quiet acceptance. Acceptance evolved into respect. Still, respect was not enough to earn leadership. Leadership required confidence from every direction. She had to rebuild trust with command, which meant sitting through debriefings where officers tried to understand why she was still alive when the system had marked her dead. They had to evaluate her judgment, her stability, her tactical clarity. She answered their questions without defensiveness. She spoke plainly about her experiences without dramatizing them. She offered insight into survival tactics, intelligence patterns, and psychological resilience learned the hard way. Command listened closely. Her perspective filled gaps in their understanding of regions where information had always been thin. Her survival made her an asset. But assets do not automatically become leaders. She demonstrated leadership in the way she handled real-world exercises. She took charge without overshadowing others. She coordinated movement with a calm authority grounded in experience rather than ego. Younger operators gravitated toward her, drawn by her ability to break down complex problems into clear decisions. Senior teammates found themselves relying on her judgment again, just as they had before she disappeared. She carried her history with quiet ownership, never using it as leverage. She let her actions define the present. Rumors circulated across bases. Some saw her as a symbol of resilience. Others were unsure how to reconcile her past with her future in the unit. She did not chase approval. She focused on mastering every responsibility placed in front of her. As weeks turned into months, she rebuilt her credibility piece by piece. She passed advanced assessments with scores that surprised evaluators. She led small squads through simulations where success required strategy, communication, and the ability to adapt under pressure. Her leadership style reflected what she had learned in isolation: listen first, decide second, move third. What set her apart was not her survival story, but the clarity she had gained from it. She understood the cost of uncertainty. She understood how fast a situation could collapse. She understood the difference between confidence and overconfidence. Her decisions carried weight because they came from someone who had lived through consequences most people only trained for. Teams responded to that. They trusted her not because she demanded it, but because she earned it with every action, every instruction, every moment she showed she had not only returned but evolved. When command finally considered her for a leadership role, they did it quietly. They observed her through field reports, peer feedback, and direct interactions. They saw how she handled conflict inside the unit, how she mentored newer operators, and how she maintained discipline without alienating anyone. They saw someone who could steady a team, not through force but through presence. Her resilience was not framed as heroism. It was framed as competence, maturity, and vision. Her appointment to lead was not dramatic. There was no speech, no spotlight. It was delivered in a simple room with a simple statement. They believed she was the right person for the job. When the news reached her team, their reaction told her everything. No hesitation, no questioning, just nods, a few smiles, and the unspoken agreement that she had earned her place. Leading the Navy SEALs meant carrying their trust, and trust built on scrutiny, honesty, and shared hardship is stronger than any reputation stamped on a record. She stepped into command not as a miracle returned from the dead, but as someone who had fought her way back into the circle, earned every inch of ground, and proven that her leadership was not dependent on her past, but sharpened by it. Turning a vanished past into a mission forward began with her understanding that she could not live the rest of her life trying to reclaim the person she was before she disappeared. That person had been shaped by training, duty, loyalty, and the rhythm of a structured military life. The woman who returned carried all of that, but she also carried 3 years of isolation, improvisation, and raw survival. Instead of viewing those years as a detour, she began to see them as a source of strength, something she could channel into a purpose larger than herself. She realized quickly that her story made people uncomfortable. It challenged the idea that the system always knows what it's doing. It reminded everyone that even elite forces can be blindsided, that a life can disappear not through failure, but through circumstance. She did not want to be treated like a symbol, but she understood the impact of her experience. When she spoke about survival, she spoke with authority. When she talked about uncertainty, she spoke from truth. People listened differently to someone who had lived in the gap between life and death for so long. She used that to push for better training protocols. She proposed methods based not on theory, but on experience. Survival tactics tailored for long-term isolation. Psychological preparation for operators who might face extended separation from their teams. Strategies for navigating environments where communication was impossible and support was non-existent. Some officers resisted at first, preferring established doctrine. She pushed back, not with ego but with evidence. Her existence was evidence. Her insights filled holes in the system's understanding, and gradually those in charge saw it too. Her mission expanded beyond tactics. She became a mentor to younger operators who struggled with doubt or fear. They saw her not as a legend, but as proof that breaking does not mean ending. She spent hours listening to their concerns, guiding them through the pressures she knew too well. Some were intimidated by her history. She disarmed that quickly. She spoke to them with honesty, not intensity. She showed them that strength was not about invulnerability, but adaptability. They trusted her because she carried her past without letting it dominate her presence. The more she embraced her new purpose, the clearer it became that her vanished years were not a void but a foundation. She understood danger differently now. She understood isolation differently. She understood resilience not as a concept, but as a muscle she had been forced to use every day. When her unit trained for extreme scenarios, she built exercises that reflected real conditions instead of textbook examples. She taught them how to read terrain with their instincts, how to conserve energy, how to make decisions under the pressure of survival rather than the structure of a plan. Her lessons reshaped the way they prepared for the unknown. Her mission also involved bridging the emotional gap that often existed in special operations. Operators carried burdens quietly. They hid exhaustion behind discipline. She saw through that because she had lived through a version of it in its harshest form. She encouraged conversations that rarely happened in those circles. She talked openly about the moments when she wanted to give up, not to inspire, but to show that perseverance was messy, painful, and human. Her honesty created space for others to acknowledge their struggles without feeling weak. That cultural shift mattered more than any tactical improvement. It saved people in ways metrics could not measure. Outside the unit, she engaged with families of deployed operators. They looked at her with a mix of respect and caution, aware that she represented both hope and fear. She understood the quiet dread they lived with, because she had watched her own family carry it. She spoke to them plainly, offering perspective not from a podium, but from experience. They appreciated her presence because she did not sugarcoat the risks. She honored their resilience as much as she honored the operators themselves. As she moved deeper into her leadership role, she realized she had become a bridge between the past and the future of the SEAL community. Her vanished years were no longer something she tried to hide or downplay. They were a driving force behind every decision she made. They pushed her to advocate for better recovery programs for returning operators. They pushed her to insist on stronger contingency planning for missions in unstable regions. They pushed her to protect her team with an intensity rooted not in fear, but in understanding. Her mission forward was not about proving she had survived. It was about using the lessons of those lost years to strengthen the people she now led. She had been erased once by mistake, but she refused to let her identity be defined by that erasure. Instead, she built a future shaped by purpose, clarity, and a commitment to making sure no one under her command ever felt as alone as she once did.